Listen to me carefully. The most dangerous thing about America's debt problem is not how large the number looks on television. It is how quietly the solution can reach into your life without ever being announced as a solution. Most people are still waiting for some dramatic moment, a default, a screaming headline, a politician standing at a podium admitting the math is broken. That is not how systems like this usually work. When a country owes too much, it does not usually wake up one morning and erase the debt with a theatrical confession. It does something colder. It changes what the dollars mean. That is the frame I want you to hold all the way through this story. Think of every dollar as a battery. The size of the battery can stay exactly the same while the charge inside it quietly weakens. The number printed on the note does not change. The purchasing power does. A saver looking only at the account balance thinks nothing happened. A borrower repaying fixed debts in those weaker dollars realizes much later that everything happened. That is the real game. And right now, America is at the point where the game matters more than the headlines. The national debt has climbed to almost $39 trillion. That is not a political slogan. That is the live number on the government's own board. Now, a lot of people hear that number and make one of two mistakes. The first group shrugs because the number is too large to feel real. The second group panics and starts talking as if the whole system will simply vanish in a weekend. Both groups miss the point. A debt burden that large does not have to produce immediate collapse to change your financial life. It only has to force policy toward an environment where savers earn less than inflation for long enough that the real burden of the debt begins to shrink. That process has a name: financial repression. It sounds academic. It is not. It is one of the oldest ways a heavily indebted system transfers pain away from the borrower and onto the holder of cash and fixed claims. The simplest version works like this. If the government owes fixed nominal dollars and the dollars themselves weaken, then the real burden of the debt weakens too. Nobody needs to type zero into a terminal. Nobody needs to announce a grand cancellation. The battery just leaks. The debt is still there on paper. The charge is gone in reality. That is why I do not think the central question is whether America can pay the debt in the theatrical sense people use online. The more important question is, in what kind of dollars will that debt be paid back? That is where the next piece matters. A lot of viral content is now hanging this whole story on Kevin Warsh as though one man is about to walk into the Federal Reserve and personally rewrite the laws of economics. That is lazy thinking. A new chair matters. Leadership tone matters. But one individual does not suddenly dictate monetary policy like a king. This is not a small detail. It changes how you should think. The risk is not that one new chair walks in and presses a magic cancel debt button. The risk is that the whole policy environment under debt pressure and political pressure keeps drifting toward a world where protecting the state's financing burden matters more than protecting the purchasing power of idle savers. That is a much more realistic threat, and it is also much more dangerous because drift is harder to emotionally detect than shock. Now let me clean up another confusion that social media keeps making worse. The Federal Reserve is not privately owned in the simplistic conspiratorial way people say online. The real structure is more complicated than that and more boring than that. But the central point for you as an investor is not ownership mythology. It is incentive structure. And the incentive structure is this: heavily indebted systems benefit when real rates stay low enough or negative enough that the debt battery keeps draining in the borrower's favor. That is the part that matters, not internet slogans. The transfer mechanism. History has run this play before. After World War II, the United States carried a debt load that looked enormous relative to the economy. The country did not solve that by some moral burst of austerity. It solved it through a mix of growth, inflation, and a financial environment that leaned heavily against savers and in favor of shrinking the real value of nominal obligations over time. People remember the prosperity. They forget the quiet haircut to holders of money and fixed claims. This is why I keep returning to the battery metaphor. If your wealth is parked in places where the number stays still while the charge leaks away, you are financing the solution without ever receiving a bill labeled as such. That is what most savers do not understand. They think safety means the number does not fall. But a stable number in a weakening unit is not safety. It is a polite form of loss. And this is where the modern American saver is most vulnerable. You can go online right now and find people congratulating themselves for earning 4% in a savings account, while inflation, taxes, and the broader cost structure of life are quietly taking more than that from the battery. They feel prudent because the principal is not volatile. But volatility is not the only way wealth disappears. Purchasing power decay is slower, quieter, and in many ways more effective because people do not fight it emotionally. They sit there smiling at the statement while the current is draining. Meanwhile, fixed-rate borrowers often stand on the other side of the same system. If you hold a long-term fixed mortgage at a low rate and your income or rents or business revenues rise over time with the general price level, then the real burden of that mortgage shrinks. The payment is fixed, the dollars are weaker, the borrower wins gradually, the saver loses gradually, same battery, different side of the leak. That is what people mean or should mean when they talk about inflation canceling debt. The debt does not vanish, its real weight shrinks. Once you see that, a lot of ordinary financial advice starts looking backward. The old saver's instinct is to hold cash, buy long bonds, feel safe, and wait. That can be a trap in a repression cycle. Long-duration bonds are especially dangerous in this kind of environment because they lock you into streams of fixed nominal payments while the purchasing power inside those payments can be quietly eroded for years. That is not a theoretical problem. It is exactly the kind of asset profile repression tends to punish. So what wins? Not everything. That is another mistake people make. They hear the inflation story and decide. The answer is to go all in on one shiny thing. Gold, crypto, real estate, big tech, foreign markets, silver coins in a bunker. That is not disciplined thinking. That is panic-wearing conviction. What tends to survive and often benefit in a battery leak world is a mix of assets with either pricing power, scarcity, or direct claims on real productive activity. High-quality equities matter because strong businesses can reprice. If a business has real pricing power, it can pass through cost increases better than weak businesses. That means its earnings have a better chance of remaining real when the currency unit weakens. Hard assets matter because they are not printed. Land, useful real estate, scarce resources, precious metals, certain kinds of real property and productive infrastructure can all respond differently from cash when the charge is leaking. Cash, flowing real assets matter because they do not merely sit there, they generate output while the unit of account weakens. And liquidity still matters, but not worshipped in the wrong form. Holding enough cash to survive volatility is sensible. Treating a giant idle cash pile as wealth preservation in a repression environment is often self-harm with good manners. This is the identity shift I want for you. Stop thinking like a statement reader. Start thinking like a purchasing power defender. A statement reader asks, is my balance stable? A purchasing power defender asks, what can this balance still do after inflation, tax drag, and time? That is the adult question. And it leads to a completely different portfolio posture. If I were building a portfolio for the next decade in a world where America's debt burden keeps pushing policy towards softer dollars, I would not build it around hope that my savings account will protect me. I would build it around resilient claims on productive assets, around businesses with pricing power, around some real asset exposure, around sensible diversification, and around the kind of cash reserve that serves as optionality rather than as a giant anchor chained to a leaking battery. I would also stop waiting for certainty because certainty is expensive. By the time the public is certain that financial repression is the operating environment, the market will have already repriced much of what matters. This is another psychological trap. People tell themselves they are being cautious when really they are asking for permission. They want the system to announce itself in simple language first. It never does. Systems speak in incentives and outcomes, not admissions. You have to read the pressure, not wait for the confession. And here is what the pressure says right now. The debt is immense, the current chair's term is ending soon, and a transition may come, but the monetary machinery remains institutional, not monarchical. The system is built around preserving financial stability, and heavily indebted systems have every reason to prefer softer real debt burdens over explicit financial pain. That is enough. You do not need a secret memo. You do not need a perfect calendar date. You do not need to know exactly when one rate cut or one policy turn arrives. You only need to know that if the battery keeps leaking, savers parked in the wrong places will be the ones silently financing the adjustment. That is the choice line. You can keep measuring your life in nominal dollars and hope the system treats savers gently, or you can build your financial life around the harsher but more useful assumption that the dollars themselves may keep losing charge and that your job is not to predict every meeting, but to stand on the right side of the leak. I know which side I would rather be on, not because I enjoy alarm, because I enjoy arithmetic. And arithmetic in a debt regime like this one has no sympathy for people who mistake a stable balance for preserved wealth.